Denmark, as you might be able to see. Now the sound is gone again.
Now
can you hear me now?
Yeah, now it's back.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. What I was about to ask you is that the Ultras, Al-Havi, and the White Knights were rivals on the balconies of the football stadiums, but they managed to go together when it came to Tahrir Square. What made these two groups that fought each other on the stands go together in Tahrir Square?
Look, they still are rivals.
Yeah.
That's not going to change. What I think has changed is, whereas before you needed the police to keep the two groups apart, there was a common interest, a common enemy.
Yeah.
They were fighting the same enemy, if you wish. And that drives people together. And what happened in Port Said to Al-Ahly could have happened to Zamalek. And Zamalek was very aware of that. And some of Zamalek's players, think about Boutreka, were very political. So the fact that you on the one hand retain that animosity and yet find common ground is not unusual, and it's probably something that the Americans should look at today.
Yeah. They could watch and learn. Yeah, as you said, it what happened in Port Said could also happen for Zamalek. So let's go on to the Port Said massacre. It was a match between Al-Ahly and Al-Masri. Again, two fan groups that didn't get along very well, but that's
there was deep hostility between them.
Yeah, exactly. This particular match, yeah, I wrote in my notes here why, how, and what. What happened at the Port Said that day?
There's little doubt in my mind that the military government wanted to teach the ultras a lesson. Now, having said that, I don't think that a bunch of military officers got around a table and said, when this is all over, we want to see 72 bodies.
No.
I think it got out of hand. This is not what they wanted to happen. But they wanted to see a crackdown. They wanted to intimidate. And they wanted to basically send the message, we're not going to continue to tolerate this. And they obviously needed to do that with a degree of plausible deniability, if you wish.
Yeah.
So security forces stood aside or were slow to respond. Someone, not by coincidence for sure, blocked the entrances to the stadium from the outside, so you couldn't open it. And there were a large number of people in the stadium who were not people who'd been frequented that stadium before, or at least not regularly. And so were clearly brought in with a purpose. And what you got was a brawl.
Yeah.
In which Al-Ahly fans were chased through the stadium, and ran up against the wall. There was nowhere to go. And many died in the stampede. Again, I think nobody anticipated that, it was going to be 72 people dead.
No.
And I'm sure that if you would have asked the military if they were willing to be honest and honestly discuss this, is this what you wanted? They would and I would take them by their word, answer in horror, no.
Yeah.
It's not that they didn't want violence, but they want, they were, my guess is they were looking for something much more controlled.
Yeah. They were
and
trying to
this
teach
got
them
out.
a lesson, and some scholars say that this was a retribution for the Tahrir Square. Do you see it in the same way that this was their
I
way
don't
of?
think it was retribution. Sure, a nice way of putting it.
Yeah,
So let's put it this way: if Tahrir Square had happened and the ultras had melted into the background, would you have gotten Port Said? Probably not.
yeah,
So it wasn't it wasn't revenge. It was trying to get a grip on the situation, trying to halt a development. Rather than, hey, we're going to hit these back. They hit us, then we're going to hit them back. I think that's a very simplistic view of the world.
yeah, yeah. But James, how about the there's been some speculation, as you said, some of the people who were at that stadium that they didn't go to that stadium frequently, or may have been their first time at the stadium. But Al Masri supporters or Al Masri ultras they got or they were suspected to be on the government side in this from the start, because obviously it looked like it was the Al Masri supporters who attacked Al-Lahavi.
Well, Al-Masri supporters were among those
Yeah,
that attacked them. They weren't the only ones, or at least we don't know who the others were. Maybe they were Al-Masri supporters, passive ones. I don't know. But members of the Al-Masri ultras group certainly participated in this. Which frankly is not surprising. Why wouldn't they? The real question is not so much whether an incident suddenly occurs and people jump in, as were the Al-Masris aware of this in advance, and if they were aware, to what degree were they accessories, participants in it?
but is it your impression that they were aware
There
of it?
there is some evidence,
Yeah,
and people have been convicted, that at least some people within the Al-Masri Ultras group, but some people mean some of their leaders, were actively engaged in preparing for this.
yeah,
Which may not be surprising given the animosity between the groups, but obviously doesn't speak well for the Al-Masri support group.
no, of course not. And some might say they maybe broke a unwritten rule among the ultras by participating on the side of the on behalf of the government.
Yeah,
But
that's a hard one. I mean, ultras groups develop in very different directions.
yeah,
So if you look at in Egypt, and actually to a degree in Italy too, where you see that ultra groups become the shock troops for corrupt officials, for criminal elements. What's the difference here?
yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, that may be the theory, but that theory has been disrupted in practice
yeah.
in multiple places. Or look at the role of ultras in the run-up to the Yugoslav wars.
Yeah, true. Yeah. But James, what have been the aftermath of this massacre?
Well, the aftermath was obviously, on the one hand, enormous shock. Um, uh, and you created martyrs and what have you. And you had the enormous battles, very vicious battles that took place several months later on Mohammed Mahmoud Street in Cairo. between the security forces and the ultras. But ultimately, what really was the watershed event was the military coup and the very brutal crackdown of the Sisi government.
Yeah.
Which really meant that initially produced the ultras as the backbone of protest against the coup. Certainly after the Rabat Square incident, in which more than 800 people were killed, mostly members of the Muslim Brotherhood, who were out there peacefully protesting on the square. That really just left the ultras over. And even that space has been totally eradicated. You've had incidents of protest in Egypt in recent years, since 2013, since the coup. But by and large, there's no space.
No.
And the risks have become phenomenal. Now I don't think that's sustainable, but that's a different discussion.
Yeah. James, when I wrote my dissertation on this particular ultras, the headline was "Enemies of the Regime" in a question mark. There's been different regimes since 2011, but do you follow this headline? Were the ultras enemies of the regime, or did they become the enemies of the regime after 2011?
Let's put it this way: the ultras by definition challenge authority, irrespective of regime.
Yeah.
That's one. So they were hostile to the regime before 2011. They were hostile to the regime after 2011. Now you've also got to understand what was the regime. The immediate successor to Mubarak after he was toppled was the military. Now, to be fair, it was the military with popular acclaim. You look at Arab protest over the last decade, it's evolved. So in 2011, the notion was you need to topple the leader. And if you've toppled the leader, then you've won.
Yeah.
And what activists and others have learned from 2011 is that's just the beginning. And if you surrender the street before there is a transition government in place that you agree with and that you're part of, you haven't won. So, we look at Tunisia as a success story, and it was a success story in 2011 terms.
Yeah.
Today, the success story alongside Tunisia is Sudan. And in Sudan, they remained on the street a year after Omar al-Bashir was toppled. Algeria is a bit more complicated, but even there, they remained on the street. Even after Bouaziz was toppled.
Yeah.
So in 2011, you had the notion, Mubarak's gone, we've won. The Egyptian military came in, and there was a certain degree of empathy towards the military, because there were some incidents, some people were killed, whatever. But by and large, the military did not step in to suppress the revolt. Now, they didn't do that because they were all in favor of the revolt, but they had their own reasons why they were happy to see Mubarak go. Being happy to see Mubarak go did not mean that they really wanted a restructuring of power. That was also going to take a lot of power away from them.
Yeah.
But at that moment, Mubarak had gone. The military was to transition to elections. Nobody at that moment envisioned the degree and the extent to which counter-revolutionary forces were going to go. First and foremost, the Gulf states. That was on nobody's radar. So, the military was an acceptable interim phase.
Yeah.
And to the military's credit, they did hold the first and only free election that Egypt has ever known. That was won by a Muslim brother.
Yeah.
The problem with it was that then you got a situation in which there was significant institutional resistance to
the brotherhood,
Mohammed, the elected president, from the judiciary, from the law enforcement, from the military, boosted and supported by external forces. And Morsi was not up to that. And so you ultimately had him removed by military force. So with other words, everything that those in Tahrir Square had believed that they had secured was wiped away within 2 years.
Yeah. Just before we end this conversation, James, I just want to know, where does the Ultras group stand today? Because there were some years without football in Egypt, or at least where
they were still without football.
Yeah, you're not allowed to. Yeah,
you don't have. You don't have access. There is no spectator access.
Exactly.
In fact, look at this week's handball World Championship, where the plans to allow limited access of fans were scrapped.
Yeah.
So there haven't been the Ultras groups still exist. But they, in a sense, exist in a void. They exist online.
Okay.
They're the basis for their popularity is not there.
Yeah.
Whether they would regain that popularity if and when we return to some degree of normalcy, and you again have soccer matches, you have spectators, we'll have to see. That's true not only for Egypt, that's true across the globe.
Yeah, of course.
But what is true, so in much of the world, the absence of spectators is a year old. In Egypt, it's a decade old.
Yeah.
So you're going to see generational changes. People move on.
Yeah.
Ultras groups are not, by and large, groups that are representative of all age groups.
No, I remember that they had a certain age, and then people got families, they got jobs, they moved
families,
away from
they have jobs. You evolve as a person, and so on. So it's very hard to say what the future of those groups will be, or whether they may emerge in different forms.
Yeah.
Your guess is as good as mine.
But do you think that I talked with a Danish expert on Tunisia last season of this podcast, and she said, well, there is the grounds for a Arab Spring 2.0, but at the moment in Tunisia, there is not people don't have the ability to do it. But do you see the same in Egypt? Does it, if a new Arab Spring should happen, will the Ultras be a part of it again?
I think you need to look at protest.
Yeah.
In 2011, but also in 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
And the protest that is to come in a far larger contest. So at the beginning of the 21st century, 2011, 2012, basically described the coming decade as a decade of defiance and dissent. And if you go back and you think about what was happening in 2011, then what you see was that the popular Arab revolts were the most dramatic expression of a global movement. You had Occupy Wall Street, you had demonstrations in Europe, you had student protests in Santiago de Chile, you had fuel protests in Jakarta, and you had the rise, that in that decade of the populists, which all at the bottom line, whatever the issue was that they were taking forward, was basically an expression of lack of confidence in leadership and lack of confidence in political systems. And you've seen that throughout the decade. So if the most dramatic moment at the beginning of the decade was the Arab popular revolts, the most dramatic element of, again, a global trend was the protests in Algeria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and in Sudan. Now, with the pandemic, with the total mismanagement by most governments of public health, and the stark economic downturn, the next decade is going to be a decade of defiance and dissent. And so it's not a question of Arab 2.0. It's a question of, a situation that is unsustainable globally and compounded in the Middle East by, autocratic rule.
Yeah.
And so on. So there's no question in my mind that you're going to see protest. But, I think it would be a mistake to look at protests in the Middle East as exceptional.
Yeah.
Rather than as, what it should, is and should be part of broader trends.
Yeah. But do you see the ultras stand up again and become a face of the protest, or is that possibility long gone?
At this point, it's gone.
Yeah.
Again, look, as long as you don't have a return to, public sports with public participation, there's no base for the ultras.
No.
Now, what happens if the pandemic is mastered tomorrow? Egypt doesn't have to worry. Everybody's vaccinated. People can move. People can go freely. And you have, social and economic protest. Possibly. But I think, put your finger up in the wind and see which way it blows.
Yeah. And by that, I think that was the perfect ending to this conversation, James. Thank you again very much for taking your time to talk with me about this particular area of the Middle East. And thank you for being a part of the podcast this time. I hope that I can use your expertise again someday.
Any day, anytime. It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I'll keep an eye on the. I was actually thinking about doing something about the handball, but I might postpone it. But I'm keeping an eye on the.
I did a story of it last.
Yeah.
I think on Sunday or Monday.
Yeah, I read it. It was a good one.
Yeah, in fact, you may want to look. On Monday, I'm sending out a 4,000-word story on the Arab revolts and where it's going.
Oh, okay. I'll have a look at that and mention that in the podcast that is out, so people can go and read it. But I might I'll keep an eye out on the podcast. Sorry, on the blog, and if there's anything that I see that could be a great history or an interesting history, I'll get in touch with you
Sure.
again.
Sure, pleasure.
But yeah, thank you very much, and
Well, good luck with it.
Thank you very much, and you
And
have
thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I hope I'll be able to bring you on one more time or two times again.
I'd look forward to that.
Thank you very much, and have a good. Well, it's still afternoon in Singapore, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I've got to go off for dinner in a little while.
Oh, not bad. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and take care.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.